This is Connie Mason. It is August the 16th, 2011, and we're at the Corsound Waterfowl Museum, and today I'm interviewing Mr. Earl Fulcher, and his wife Janice will be chiming in every once in a while, I'm sure. And so welcome today, Earl and Janice, and thank you so much for coming in today on such a beautiful day here to Harkers Island. And Earl, if you would just state your mom and dad's names and what they did.
My father was Weldon Earl Fulcher Sr. of Stacy, born and raised native. My mother was Maybelle Williams Fulcher, and she originally came from Beaufort County and by way of Carteret County, and she and Daddy got together somewhere along the line, I don't know. Anyway, they married, and the result was me and my sister.
And your sister's name is? Your sister's name is?
Virginia Dare Fulcher, and they always said she was the first little girl born in America.
Anyway, to them anyway, right?
To us, yes.
And she married Bobby Oglesby.
At Crab Point, yes.
Crab Point, which was where your mother's people was living at the time.
They moved from Beaufort County in 1921 and settled down in the Crab Point farming community.
Right. And what did your dad Weldon do for
He was a commercial fisherman, bred and born. Later in life, after they moved to the Crab Point area of Morehead City, he worked as a night watchman at the shipbuilding where they built the shrimp boats. Morehead City Shipbuilding, I believe it was called at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And
what was his job there?
Night watchman.
He was the night watchman.
He had a bad back problem. When he was a young man, I think about 28, he lifted a Model A Ford out of the ditch.
Holy mackerel.
The back end of it, and ruined his back. He slipped his hip out of joint and apparently ruptured a disc, which we didn't know about till years later. But it all came from the same injury.
That's bad.
It was terrible.
Did he have to stay in bed and traction a lot? Or?
He was, Dr. Royal, Ben Royal from Morehead City, put him in a body cast for 6 weeks, from his hips to under his arms.
Was this after you and Dare had come along?
Yes, but I just can remember it. I was just a little boy, 3 or 4 years old.
And where were you, when you were living in Stacy, where were you living? Where was your house?
The house was located about midway around what was called the Horseshoe at that time. Today it's the Stacy Loop. But we lived near Fulcher's Creek, which was our base of operation for the boat.
And it's still called Fulcher's Creek?
And it's still Fulcher's Creek. It's located on the map, the Coast and Geodetic Survey map, so it's identifiable.
So when you're going around the Horseshoe, is it when you first come into Stacy, you take the first entrance into the...
By the cemetery, on the Stacy Loop, and go about a quarter of a mile, and you will turn left. The road makes a 90-degree turn, just like a city corner. And we go about another 300 yards, and it's the first house on the right.
Is that house still there?
Although it's not our house, we sold the property, and then the house that's there now was built later on. But that's where we grew up. That was our place. And
so the house was torn down and another house built in its place?
The old house was sold to Carteret Fulcher. He tore it down and repaired the one he was living in, which was about the same shape. This was 1951.
And Carty is spelled C-A-R-D-I-E?
C-A-R-T-I-E.
T-I-E.
Carty.
What was that short for? Do you know?
I don't know. That was his name.
That was his name.
And his dad, my dad, Mitchell Fulcher, was the famous duck carver, Mitchell Fulcher.
That's right. And your daddy did some carving too.
Yes, he did.
Tell me about that.
Early in life, to make decoys to hunt with. But later in life, as a project to stay busy, a hobby you might say, and to make a little money.
Right. And he would, now in the later years, was it all miniature work or decorative?
No, well, they were full-size decoys, a lot of it, and people would buy them to hunt with, and for ornaments to sit. He made doorstops. He would bore a big hole in the bottom of them and fill it full of lead, and it'd make a good doorstop because it was heavy.
Yeah, yeah.
But
have you got one of those?
No.
Do you know anybody who does?
Not the doorstop.
Not the doorstop.
Unless Douglas has.
Right. Right. Your son.
My son, his grandson. But a good bit of the wood that he used came out of the alligator swamp.
Really?
And I know that's so because I went up there with him with a chainsaw and sawed the wood and put it in a pickup truck and a trailer, and we made 2 or 3 trips up there after that juniper wood.
Wow. Well, you know, that's kind of unusual, isn't it, that you go up that far to get to juniper?
Well, we had a connection. Mama had a cousin. My mother had a cousin living not too far from that swamp area in Hyde County, and her husband was Jordan Clayton, and he had access from the pulpwood people who owned that area in there to go in there and cut just the trees that had fallen, no live ones, just right. And really that's what we wanted. The dried out juniper.
Right. How great. I never heard that story before. Now, I have a pair of your mom and daddy's decoys, the little ones. Did they start doing that in later years?
Well, after they moved to Moorhead, or the Crab Point community, in 1951, and he died in 1976, so it was in that period of time. And something that's kind of sort of comical, their brand was WM, Weldon Maybell. It was a W right side up and a W upside down, you might say.
Yeah, it looks like a squiggle.
Yeah.
If you don't know. Now Aunt Maybell, your mother Maybell, she painted some of those decoys. Did she paint all of them?
She did most of the painting. The fine painting, anyway, the trim work.
Is it because she could see better or had a steadier hand?
Well, she had a better hand at that, and I don't know that she could see any better because they both wore glasses. But she was also a great seamstress.
Oh, yeah. She worked in Moorhead for...
at the dress shop for the Learys and the Chalks, and then later for Mr. Webb, David Webb.
Yeah, she was a very talented seamstress. And it ran in the family. Aunt Hilda was too, so... Hilda Williams Du Bois Simpson.
Yep, that's her.
And tell me about his hunting, or his fishing, excuse me. Was he a long hauler?
Oh, yes. That's what I first remember him as. Of course, we peeler crabbed and clammed and long hauled. It was seasonal work. And then I believe in 1944 he laid all of that aside and started shrimping. So from 44 on to about 50 or 51 when they moved, that was what he did mostly. Now we clammed some in the winter between the shrimping seasons.
Did he have what kind of boat did he have? Did he have several boats?
Well, the first boat he had was about 28 feet long, just a little small Coruscant boat with a Palmer engine in it.
Palmer, yeah.
Well, some people say Palmer, Palmer. We always said Palmer. Palmer.
Palmer.
But anyway, it was an 8 horsepower marine engine that was made for boats.
Did it have a reverse in it?
No.
That's right.
No, you had to point and start. If you
Point and start.
If you want to know what I mean by point and start, you took your oar and pushed the bow around the way you wanted to go, and then started the engine.
I got you. That's good. That's good. Yeah, I had heard Mr. Iyer told me about. He had a Lathrop engine.
Yeah, Lathrop made a lot of marine engines back.
But they didn't have a reverse either. And he said you had to go real slow coming to the dock.
Fairbanks Morse made a 2-cycle engine, a marine engine, and it would run either way because it didn't have a camshaft, it didn't have valves, it just had ports. And I am told, now I never saw this, but I am told that they would rig a switch up to the magneto, the electrical side of the magneto, and then run the other side to ground on the engine. And of course, as long as that switch was open and was not grounding the ignition system, it would run. Well, the operator, the boat owner, captain, whatever you prefer to call him, would come to the dock and approach real slow with that engine running, going ahead. And when he'd get to a certain position of the dock, he would put that switch on, which would stop the engine. And on that last turn she had a great old big flywheel. The last turn of that flywheel, she'd rock. And when she'd rock the other way, he'd take the switch off and she'd start backwards. And that was his backup. And that's a true story.
Wow. Wow, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's ingenuity, too.
But it has to be a 2-cycle engine that will do that.
Well, see, and I know where your son Douglas gets his electrical interest. Oh, that's great. And did he name his boats?
Not the first one, but he sold that boat and bought one from James Fulcher, who was a Stacy native, that Mr. Ambrose Fulcher from Atlantic built. It was 40 feet long, and the boat's name was the Sadie.
The Sadie, S-A-D-I-E?
S-A-D-I-E, named for his wife. So after my dad bought the boat, to separate it from others, and Mr. Howard Nelson had another boat built, and they named that one the Sadie. Oh. So there was more than one Sadie. He added a B, the Sadie B, like Bravo. And that's what that boat went by the rest of his days.
Oh, wow. Wow. So when he went hauling now, do you remember anything about how they chose which haul?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me about
Janice can tell you something about this too.
Good, Janice.
We'll give her a chance in a minute.
Okay.
They on a Sunday night, or it could have been a Saturday night, either one of the 2 nights, the fishermen would always meet to the store, the local store. And this was before the days of television and telephones. So it was just a meeting place for the whole community. And each they would put the name, each hall was named, like the Thoroughfare Hall, or the Benny's Pound Hall, or Sam's Bend Hall, or the Inlet Hall, or Nelson's Bay Hall, or Starnes Bay Hall. They were all named. And each boat captain would reach in the hat and get a name.
And so all the halls that were named were in that hat?
Yeah. And that would be that person's haul for Monday. Then they would rotate it around during the rest of the week. Ever who hauled a certain place today had another one tomorrow.
So there was a system where they knew if they did this one there, the next one was this certain one.
Right.
Now, Janice, you tell me your take on that.
Well, that's what my daddy did. He was a long hauler.
And what was his name?
Johnny Smith, John Daniel Smith. They called him Captain Johnny.
And he was from?
Atlantic, born and raised in Atlantic. And he worked till they also quit hauling or after many years when shrimping got to be popular, and they went shrimping. And he clammed when hauling was not in the hot summer. He clammed. He did a little bit of it all. He raised 8 children. He had to do something.
He had 8 children?
Yeah.
And where do you fall in those 8
I'm
children?
the youngest.
You're the youngest. Oh, that's
Youngest.
wonderful.
But anyway, they would go down to the store, as Earl says, probably Saturday evening more than Sunday, because Daddy didn't like to work on Sunday. That was his day off.
Now, this was in Atlantic.
In Atlantic.
So this was what you're talking about, Earl, was in Stacy.
Yeah.
But they had the halls in Atlantic. They had all the halls that they used, Royal Shoals, those back of Cedar Island. I don't know how many they had. And they had a number of long haulers then. And they'd put it in the hat, and they would draw their long haul. And I don't know that they ever traded off, but I am assuming if they were dissatisfied, they worked it out among themselves.
I had heard from Sonny Williamson that if you had done your haul and somebody else hadn't gone out to the one that they drew the hat from, they'd go out and do that haul too. You know.
Sometimes they'd make 2 hauls a day, yeah. But now the Atlantic people, most of them use Pamlico Sound and the extreme east end of Court Sound, whereas the Stacy people used the mid part of Court Sound and the south part of Court Sound.
Now, was Davis Shore part of this hauling community too?
Well, 1 or 2 crews. Stacy and Atlantic were the 2 main places that long haul. Now, Sea Level had 2 or 3 also, but there was a bunch of them from Stacy and Atlantic.
Because somebody had mentioned, I forget who now, there was a haul off of Davis called the Stakes. Do you remember
Well,
that?
the Southern Stakes and the Northern Stakes.
Southern Stakes and the Northern Stakes.
But it's really more off against Stacy. The haul off against Davis was Benny's Pound.
Benny's Pound.
And that's
Off of
right
Davis.
in front of our house.
Right in front of your house.
That day. Well, a little bit to the
Right
left.
off of Army Camp Road.
Right off of our
And you can tell them how that name came about.
Uncle Benny was Benny Davis, and he lived at Davis. He was Johnny Davis's uncle. I believe, no,
It was his wife.
he was Chat's uncle,
His
Johnny's
wife's uncle.
wife's uncle. And he never married. And he lived had a little house right back of where our house is. When I first moved down there, you could tell where it was because his grandson Bill, his nephew Bill, planted the field. And you could tell where the oyster shells and everything were all around the house. The stuff didn't grow as good as it did.
Oh, how about
The
that?
rest of the field, it was there, and he had an orchard down there. I understand he had a lot of apples, and he worked Sundays just like he did Mondays, which wasn't looked upon very favorably on Davis in that day and age. And but he was Uncle Benny, and this was right off of his land, and so they named it Uncle Benny's Pound.
So it had nothing to do with a pound net or anything like that. It was just
Fish pound,
his
so to speak.
right. Well, that's very interesting because I had heard Benny's Pound before, the name, and so I'm trying to get all the haul names that I can, down because the first time I ever heard such a thing before Daddy died, I did some interviews with him, and that was the first time I had ever heard about the whole process and the names and everything, and so we're trying to get that all documented so we don't lose that. But when you're hauling, what are you fishing for, Earl?
Well, back in that day, anything they could catch, hogfish, spots, trout, bluefish,
Croakers.
few mackerel, some croakers, not jumping bullets. They jump out of the net. And usually the jumping boats were in shallow water also, unless it was a school in the fall of the year. But the general run of the bottom fish that are in Core Sound, there was a few mackerel.
Now, did you help your dad with hauling?
Not really as a worker. I was old enough to go as a boy on the boat.
Yeah.
But I know how it's done, and I've seen it done.
Right.
But I never did participate.
Who was the stake man who was the stake man on your father's crew?
We called him the footer. He was the man that footed up the net. I don't remember.
Do you remember any of the men that was on your daddy's crew?
Yeah, Albert Gaskell. Of course, Daddy and Mr. Dane Fulcher worked together.
Dane, D-A-N-E?
Yeah, well, some people say Dean, some say Dane. It was Billy Smith's widow, Janice, granddaddy.
So probably Dean, because that's her son's
But
name.
of course, cousin Clem went with him some, and Edgar Fulcher, after he retired and came home, went with him some. And I really don't remember all of the names.
Oh yeah, well that's fine. That's fine. And do you remember any of the folks that were?
Oh yeah, it was all family, almost all family. My daddy had one boat, and his older brother had the other one. Daddy's boat was the Olena, and it was built by Mr. Ambers.
Olene?
Olena, O-L-E-N-A.
Okay. Who was that named for?
It was named for his oldest granddaughter. She was a couple of years older than me. And she was the first girl, and her name was Daphne Olena. And so he used the Olena for the name. And Mr. Ambers built it, and he said it was the best boat Mr. Ambers ever built because he stood there and watched him every nail. And it was done just exactly like he wanted it done. And the other boat was the Nettie M, and they bought that from, I think, I don't know the history of that.
That's Nettie?
Nettie
and M.
Now, Uncle Henry's oldest daughter was named Nettie, so I'm sure it was named for her. But they were the captains, and then Daddy's boat consisted of my brother Gaston, my brother-in-law Elmo, and my brother-in-law Preston at times.
Elmo Gaskell?
Elmo Gaskell.
Oh, I had a great interview with Elmo.
Did you? He's
Yes.
my nephew.
Well, and I need to go get his picture today if I can find him.
Well, this was the Elmo you know's daddy.
Oh, his daddy, yeah.
And Uncle Henry's crew was his son, little Henry, and his son-in-law, who was also named Henry, but Henry Fulcher rather than Henry Smith.
And what was your daddy's name?
Johnny Smith.
Johnny Smith. Okay.
John
I just want to be
Daniel
sure I had it down on the tape. Okay, wonderful. Well, you remembered a lot of those people. They didn't let girls go out, did
No, I used to beg Daddy to let me go. He finally took me shrimping in later years. He'd take me once in a while shrimping, but he never would take me long hauling. He said it was no place for a girl.
Well, in long hauling, tell me about a typical day long hauling. You know, how early would you start out?
Depending on the tide, they had to pull. They usually hauled on the incoming, what we call the flood tide, and depending on which side of the inlet you were on is the way the water flowed, the tidal current. And no more horsepower than they had in those boats back in those days. They could not pull those nets against the moving water or against the current. So they hauled with the tide. Sometimes they would set out before daylight. Other times it'd be mid-morning. Sometimes it'd be after lunch. And finish up after dark. Did
they stay out there overnight, or?
Well, sometimes they would. Way back in the early days of it, and I've heard your daddy talk about going to, in West Bay, which is near the point of march between South River and Cedar Island. And I've heard my daddy say that they hauled at night and they had to get the nets together by or before daylight, the bluefish would go out.
Why is that?
I don't know. They could see the net, or they had some method of finding out they were entrapped. And
how about that?
And they had to close those nets before day or by daylight, or they'd lose the bluefish, and that's what they were after.
That's great.
And another interesting story that your daddy told me about hauling, and this was around there. This was back before there was any roads down east, so I guess it was in the 20s, early to mid-20s. Your daddy, Rudolph Mason, remembered that he was around there hauling with his daddy, Mr. Johnny Mason. And the same Janice is sitting here telling you these stories. Her daddy, Johnny Smith, was also around there hauling. Well, they were selling to a fellow named Mac Lupton, who was from Cedar Island but had his fish business in Newbern. Well, see, that's where they got their ice back then.
From Newbern.
From a run boat, they called it. The boat that would come down to buy the fish would also bring ice from Newbern. And but Mac Lupton told his boat operator, don't buy but so many 100 pounds of whatever kind of fish that's available from each boat. I can't handle them. So Rudolph your daddy tells the story that they hauled and they didn't catch hardly anything. Mr. Johnny Smith hauled and he caught more trout than he could sell. And he tried to get the boat captain to take them and credit them to his crew, your daddy's crew. And the boat bar wouldn't do it. He had to turn them loose and let them go.
Well, that's ridiculous, isn't it? He must have been a federal worker.
He was trying to do what he was told, I guess.
He was trying to keep his job, I imagine.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, Daddy told a lot of stories about working so hard, bringing fish in, and then couldn't sell them.
Well, and got very little for them after you did sell them.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about hunting just for a second, because so where you lived around the loop, the horseshoe, that was considered Piney Point, wasn't it?
Piney Point, and we called it Piney Pint.
Right. And Piney Pint was kind of a landmark when you were traveling up and down.
It's on the Coast and Geodetic Survey chart even today. Piney Point. It projects out in the Sound.
And that kind of signals what? If you're coming up going north on Course Sound, that kind of lets you know that you're getting ready to come out of the Sound, or
no, not necessarily. That puts you in the midway section. I wouldn't say just exactly midway, although it's close from Barden's Inlet, which is where Back Sound joins Court Sound. And from there to Wainwright Island, which is where Core Sound joins Powder Cove Sound on the north, is just about the same distance.
So it's a signal for a midway point.
Sort of the midway point, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if did your daddy or the families in Stacy make a lot of use of core banks, of the banks over there across?
Yes. Before the Park Service got it, it was accessible to everyone. A lot of the local people had little camps over there in the spring of the year. The men that did the peeler crabbing had camps over there, and they would stay. Go over there and stay 3 or 4 nights, 3 or 4 days at a time. Then other people had camps just for the pleasure of it. And a lot of us Sundays didn't have church every Sunday back then. I remember my mother would cook chicken and fix other things, and we'd get on the boat on a Sunday and go over to the banks and spread a sheet and have a picnic. You even go swimming in the ocean. And then the hunting in the wintertime. Back in those days, in the 20s and 30s, there were a lot of waterfowl over there, ducks and geese.
So it's primarily ducks and geese there, and maybe brant further north?
Did
you have brant?
We had a few, not very many.
Yeah.
Brant down around Portsmouth.
Yeah.
Cedar Island to Portsmouth.
And did you eat them or sell them, or what was the
Both.
inspiration to go hunting?
Well,
besides the sport of it,
the loving to do it, the liking to do it. But people back in those days carried hunters out for pay. Of course, there's still some of that going on, but there was a lot of it going on then.
Did your daddy do that?
A little bit, some. Now, not like some of the Davis people. The Davis people were big in that.
Yeah, that was Ammi Paul. And
Ammi Davis, Willis, Ammi Willis.
Ammi
And Ammi Paul probably too, but oh my, there's so many of them.
There was two Ammis then. There was Ammi Paul and Ammi Willis.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. What was Ammi short for? Do you know?
That was their name, so far as I know. They were like Cardi.
Yeah.
Cardi.
Cardi.
Ammi was their name. I don't
Okay.
know it was short for anything.
Okay.
No, it was a name.
It was a name.
And these Pauls down to Beaufort today came.
Well, we're talking about when your family went over and spread a sheet and had a little picnic. Did Weldon have a camp over there of some
No,
type?
we never did have one.
Did you use somebody else's? Did you ever
Sometimes.
do you remember whose it was? Or?
Yes, Mr. Fred Willis from Davis had a camp in the Great Island Bay,
Great Island Bay.
which is near where the Park Service has got those camps now.
With Alger Willis camps, is that what they're called now?
Yep.
Or?
They're near. The east end of them is just about the same area.
Okay, that's good to know.
And we would go over there during the war years, World War II, and we'd have spread towels over the windows. You couldn't have a light; it was blackout. And we'd go over there and climb. All of us, my mother and daddy and Dare and I, we'd all go climbing, and we'd sell them. I mean, that was the purpose. And we'd stay right over there and had cooking facilities. And,
How'd you go climbing? I mean, were you signing or?
mostly, yes. Had a little 4-prong rake about 4 or 5 inches long with 4 teeth on it, and they'd make a little mud sign on the sandy bottom, and you reach right down and pick him right up.
There you go. And I guess there wasn't any regulations about how big they had to be at that time.
No, or how small.
Or how small, yeah.
Yeah.
And the camp, can you describe what it was like?
Yes, usually a little 15 by 20 or 12 by 18, or built on little stakes up so it would hold it up off of the marsh. And it was floored inside, one single wall, no ceiling inside, and cathedral type ceiling.
Exposed rafters.
You could almost see the stars sometimes between the shingles, but nevertheless, it was enjoyable.
It was shelter.
Yeah, enough wind to be comfortable, and
They had built-in bunks.
Built-in bunks. About how many people did they sleep in something like that?
usually about 4.
4. Now I understand. Now before I get to that, did they like to hunt in stakes or from the shore?
Both stake blinds out in the open water, and along the marsh, usually on a projected out point would be the best place. And sometimes in ponds, especially what we call pond ducks, like mallards and black ducks and teal and springtails and that class of duck.
So a natural small pond on the banks over there?
And back in those days, everybody used corn. We really fed them. And that would attract the ducks to the blind. And at the same time, the quality of meat was much better.
I bet it was.
It's the same as putting a young cow and feeding him out on corn before you put him on the table.
There you go. Yeah. Getting that fish out of the bird first.
Yep.
So instead of having to parboil them 3 or 4 hours.
And the Rod and Gun Club over there, which I don't remember how far back, I reckon back in the early 20s when that was built. And we always called them the Yankees, the people, wealthy people from up north, built that thing. And
Did you ever go inside?
yeah, oh yes, I went inside it a number of times. It was a nice place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they would hire a guide a resident guide that would go over there and live, move his family, and cook for them when they would come. And,
Did you know who any of those people that cooked for him or stayed over
Leroy Davis from Davis was one of the main ones. Was his wife named? What was his wife's name? Was it Bertha, or was that?
Yeah, her name was Bertha.
Bertha?
They were over there for years. I believe they were the longest caretakers there was.
Wow.
In that club. Then this same Carteret Fulcher that I mentioned a while ago was also a caretaker for a number of years, as were others. So there was others besides them, but Leroy would fill the stern of his boat full of 200-pound sacks of corn, and every evening he'd go out to those blinds. They had 8 or 10 of them, and put a sack of corn around each blind.
Goodness.
That'll bring the ducks.
That'll bring the ducks. And wasn't there another hunting club out there on Core Banks, but it was further up from you, I think.
There was at Harbor Island.
Pillenterries.
And the Pillenterries too, which was almost across on the banks from Harbor Island. Harbor Island was out in the middle of the water, surrounded by water.
Now, is there anything left of that over there on Harbor Island?
No, it's they tell me there's just a little small place of sand left, and you can't even detect where the hunting club was. Mm-hmm. But it's all just, and there was 5 or 6 acres of it at one time, I understand.
Mm-hmm. And was that where there was a community there?
You talking about Hog Island?
Yeah, Hog Island.
Not far from it, maybe no more than a mile, back towards Cedar Island.
Do you remember anything about Hog Island?
Well,
the community?
not the people living there, I don't, but Hog Island's still there, part of it.
They have a big building there now.
They had a school there. Children went to school, had a post office.
And do you recall when it declined, when people came off of there, or why?
The end of it was probably 33 storm.
Oh yeah.
That changed history down east.
Kind of like Katrina. I mean, not Katrina, Isabel.
Yeah, Isabel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it did the same thing to Lukens and some of those areas over towards South River too.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell me, Miss Janice, how you got to Davis from Atlantic?
I married a man from Davis.
And his name was?
Harlan Murphy. And we moved to Davis.
And what did he do?
He fished, shrimp, and fished.
Mm-hmm. And how long did he do that? All his life?
Well, he had 2 or 3 periods of going to Cherry Point for a year or 2, and then he couldn't stand it any longer, so he quit and go fishing again.
What was his boat names?
Well, the first one was the Layla G. That's one he bought.
Layla G?
Mm-hmm. It was built by a couple of men in Atlantic and named for their daughters. And but he bought it from Lambert Morris. Lambert owned it with his Menhaden plant he had there in Davis.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that Menhaden plant. Where was that located?
It was up at the creek, but it was gone when I moved to Davis. The building was there.
Well, up the creek. Now, where is that? Is that where James Steyer?
Oyster Creek.
Oyster Creek, where the crab.
Right.
No.
It was on this.
Yeah, I got you.
It was on this side of the creek rather than where the crab.
Where the new launching ramp is.
Yes.
Right at the foot of the bridge.
Mm-hmm. So that's where Mr. Lambert Morris had his Menhaden.
Mm-hmm.
Was it on the same? Was it on the sound side of the road there?
Right, exactly where that launching ramp is now.
Really? Okay.
On the right.
Okay.
And let me give you some history on that.
Okay.
A man from Camp Glen, which is now part of Morehead City, whose name was Eddie Copeland, built that plant there first. And he kept it a number of years. I used to go in there, my daddy and I, and sell fish scrap to him, which is another story you might want to pursue. Anyway, he sold it to Lambert. Lambert Morris, who was Judge Lambert Morris. He was an Atlantic native, a lawyer. And Lambert operated it a few years, I don't remember how many, and he moved it to Lennoxville, east of Beaufort.
And that's where it stayed, right?
And it became the Humphreys out of Virginia, the Humphreys plant. They bought it and enlarged it, made a bigger plant out of it. And, of course, it's all defunct now. There's a great big $500,000 houses built where it used to be.
Okay, so it wasn't in the same place as the Wheatleys?
Beaufort Fisheries.
Beaufort Fisheries.
East of Beaufort Fisheries.
It was
just
east of
a little
Beaufort.
bit.
Okay,
So toward the point.
Okay, so it was near the Black Cat.
That was near the Black Cat.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Tell me about that scrap fish.
Well, back when the long haulers, they used to cull their fish on the fishing grounds. And the scrap was the pinfish, the menhaden shad, anything they couldn't sell was considered scrap.
Oh, things like skate too, or little dogfish,
not so much sharks or skates. It was small croakers, small spots, a pinfish, shad, menhaden shad, and some others that I can't think of right now. But anyway, whatever they couldn't sell, and they would give it to different people to get rid of it rather than throwing it overboard. So they would shovel it right in our boat. So, and Daddy had this bad back problem, and of course they tried to help him out. And then we'd take the boat and go to Davis, and put that scrap out at the plant.
And they'd pay you for that.
And we'd get. No, I don't remember what we got paid.
Probably wasn't a whole lot.
It wasn't much, no.
That's better than
But
nothing.
every little bit helped.
That's right.
Now let me tell you something else about that. The fish dealers saw that there was a chance for them to make more money. So they started sending what we call the run boat to the long haul crew, which would bail the whole thing in the boat and take it to the fish house and cull it at the fish house and save out that which they wanted to sell. And they built a scrap house with a dryer and something to dehydrate them with and make fertilizer and fish meal and so on. And they didn't pay the fishermen anything for that. So that was another asset to them.
So there's always been kind of this love-hate relationship between a fish dealer and a fisherman out there.
Yep.
Because it seems I've heard that a
And
lot.
I could say more, but I won't.
Okay, I understand. I understand. Well, I really appreciate you coming out today, and I could talk to you forever. You know that.
Well,
But I was wondering if you had any photographs of Uncle Weldon that I might be able to copy.
I've got one or two, yes, not with me. But
Are they in Moorhead or Davis?
most of them to Crab Point. Most. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe will you come on Wednesdays to Crab Point?
Well, normally, but we're not tomorrow.
Okay.
But I'll see that you get them.
Okay.
I'll be there Sunday.
And okay. Well, I'll bring my camera and I'll just take a picture. So, but right now I'll just kind of close out. I could do another interview with you. You know that. There's much more there, but
Whatever.
This has been really a rich interview, and I really appreciate you coming out today. And we're going to get a picture of both of you over there in the other side of the museum. But I thank you for your help.
You certainly are welcome, Cousin Connie.
All right, and in the interest of full disclosure, he is my first cousin. His mother was my mother's sister, and she was the youngest of 9 children, and his mother was the oldest of the 9
correct.
children. So I always feel like you're my uncle.
Well, that's all right, too.
It's a good place to be. Thank you, Janice and Earl. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Thank you.